I started my shift at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, the same way I had started it for the previous 14 weeks, by clocking in at the small console outside the security office and walking the empty corridors of what had been, until 8 months earlier, a functioning regional hospital in the southern part of West Virginia. The hospital had been closed in March of this year, when the parent company that owned it had filed for bankruptcy and had shut down operations across 3 states in a single week. The building itself had not been sold yet. The building had been put on the market through a commercial real estate broker in Charleston, and the broker had told the parent company that the building would sell faster if it was kept in show-ready condition, which meant clean floors and clean bathrooms and clean windows and a general absence of the kind of decay that empty buildings accumulate when they are not maintained. I was the maintenance. I worked 4 nights a week, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., alone in a 4-story hospital building that had 312 patient rooms, 6 operating suites, an emergency department, a cafeteria, 3 administrative wings, and a basement that contained the morgue, the central plant, and a maze of utility tunnels that I had never been required to enter. My job was to clean the public areas and the corridors, to check that the locked rooms remained locked, to verify that the security cameras were operational, and to log any maintenance issues in a tablet that synced with the broker's office in Charleston. I made $22 an hour. Now, the pay was good for the area. The job had been advertised through a temp agency that specialized in industrial cleaning. I had taken it because I had been laid off from a manufacturing job in May, and I had a daughter in high school and a mortgage, and I needed something quickly. The first detail that was off, on the night I am about to describe, was that the elevator in the East Wing was on the 3rd floor when I arrived. The elevator was supposed to be on the 1st floor. The protocol was that the previous shift, which was the day shift maintenance worker, a man named Carl Brennan, would return both elevators to the 1st floor at the end of his shift at 6 p.m. He would do this as part of his closing checklist. The closing checklist was logged. I checked the log when I started my shift. Carl had logged the elevator return at 5:47 p.m. The log entry said both elevators on 1st. The east elevator was on 3rd. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I'm asking because I want to know how many of you are awake during the hours when buildings are supposed to be empty, the way the hospital was supposed to be empty when I noticed the elevator on the wrong floor. I called Carl. The protocol for discrepancies was to call the previous shift before logging anything as a maintenance issue, because most discrepancies turned out to be miscommunications or minor errors that the previous shift could explain. Carl picked up on the 3rd ring. He sounded like he had been asleep. I told him about the elevator. He said he had returned both elevators to the 1st floor, yet he said he had verified it. He said he had stood in the lobby and watched both sets of doors close on the 1st floor before he had locked the building. He said he had logged it because he had done it. I told him the east elevator was now on the 3rd floor. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Aaron, just send it down. The elevator does that sometimes. The system has a glitch where the cars will reposition themselves overnight if there's a fire system test or a power fluctuation. Send it down to 1 and don't worry about it." I told him, okay. I went to the lobby. I pressed the call button for the east elevator. The button lit up. The display above the elevator showed the car was on the 3rd floor. The display did not change. The car did not move. I waited about 30 seconds. The car stayed on the 3rd floor. I pressed the call button again. The button stayed lit. The car stayed on the 3rd floor. The east elevator had been working at the start of my previous shift, 2 nights earlier. I had used it that night to bring up cleaning supplies to the 2nd floor, where I was scheduled to deep clean the patient rooms in the cardiac wing. The elevator had worked normally. It had moved when called. It had stopped at the floors I had selected. There had been no indication of any malfunction. I called Carl back. I told him the elevator was not responding to the call button. He sighed. He said, "Aaron, I'm off shift. I'm not coming back tonight. If the elevator's actually broken, log it as a maintenance issue, and the broker will send a tech out tomorrow. Use the west elevator if you need to get supplies upstairs, or use the stairs. The stairs are fine." I asked him whether the call button might be broken instead of the elevator itself. He said it was possible. He told me to check the call button on a different floor. He told me, again, that he was off shift and that he was going back to bed and that he would see the maintenance log in the morning. I went to the second floor stairs. I took the stairs up because I was not going to use an elevator that had repositioned itself overnight without explanation, regardless of what Carl said about glitches. I reached the second floor. I went to the call panel for the east elevator on the second floor. I pressed the up button. The button lit up. The display above the elevator doors on the second floor showed the car was on the third floor. I waited. The car did not move. I pressed the down button. The button lit up. The display did not change. I went up to the third floor by the stairs. I reached the third floor landing. The east elevator was supposed to be on the third floor, according to the displays. I went to the elevator doors. The doors were closed. There was no display above the doors on the third floor. The third floor display had been removed during a renovation in 2019, before the hospital had closed and had not been replaced. The elevator stopped on the third floor only by sound. You could hear it ding when it arrived, and you could hear the doors open. There was no visual confirmation from outside the elevator. I stood in front of the doors. I pressed the call button on the third floor panel. The button lit up. The doors did not open. I waited. The hallway was quiet. The third floor was administrative offices, mostly closed and locked, with a few conference rooms and the office of the former hospital administrator. The lights in the hallway were on, the way they always were, the way the broker required them to be for security purposes. The lights were the standard fluorescent overhead fixtures, the kind that hum slightly when they are on. The hum was the only sound in the hallway except for the sound of my own breathing. I pressed the call button a third time. Nothing. I gave up on the call button. I decided I would log the elevator as a maintenance issue and use the west elevator and the stairs for the rest of my shift. I turned to walk back to the stairwell. As I turned, I heard the elevator's mechanical chime. The chime was the sound the elevator made when it was about to open its doors after arriving at a floor. Yet I had heard the chime hundreds of times in my 14 weeks at the hospital. The chime was distinctive. It was a single high tone, followed by a lower tone, the standard hospital elevator arrival sound. The doors opened. The elevator car was empty. The interior light was on. The car was, by every visible characteristic, a normal elevator car at a normal floor with no passengers and no cargo. The car had arrived because I had pressed the call button. The car had taken about 3 minutes longer to respond than it should have, but it had responded. The doors were now open and the car was waiting for me. I did not get in. I want to be honest about why I did not get in. The reason was not a clear, articulated suspicion that something was wrong with the elevator. The reason was a vague reluctance, the kind of reluctance you feel when you walk into a room and something about the room is slightly off, but you cannot identify what. The reluctance was strong enough that I stood in the hallway with the doors open, and I tried to think about what was bothering me. I looked at the elevator. The car was clean. The lights were on. The buttons on the panel inside the car were not lit up. There were no obvious indications of malfunction. The detail that was bothering me, I realized after about 10 seconds of looking, was that the elevator car had a small piece of trash on the floor. The trash was a paper coffee cup, the kind that comes from the coffee shop in the medical office building across the parking lot, which had also closed in March when the hospital closed. The cup was crumpled and lying on its side near the back wall of the elevator. Yet the cup was not a piece of trash that should have been in the elevator. Carl was thorough. Carl would not have left a coffee cup in the elevator at the end of his shift. The elevator car had been cleaned by Carl the previous afternoon as part of his standard rotation. Carl logged each elevator cleaning. I checked the log on my tablet. Carl had cleaned both elevators at 4:22 p.m. the previous day. The log entry included the standard procedure note, which was that the elevators had been swept, mopped, and the panels had been disinfected. The coffee cup had appeared in the elevator between 4:22 p.m. the previous day and approximately 10 p.m. tonight, which was when I had pressed the call button on the first floor and the elevator had not responded. The window was approximately 30 hours. During those 30 hours, the building had been locked. The alarm system had been armed for the overnight period before my previous shift. My previous shift had occurred without me using the east elevator. The building had been locked again, and the day shift had occurred with Carl using the west elevator according to his logs. I closed the elevator doors. I pressed the button on the panel that closes the doors and holds the car at the floor. The doors closed. I walked back to the stairs. I went down to the first floor. I went to the security office. The security office was a small room near the main entrance with a bank of monitors that displayed the feeds from the building's security cameras. There were 47 cameras in total, covering the major corridors, the stairwells, the elevator interiors, the loading dock, the parking lots, and the main entrances. Yes, the camera feeds were recorded onto a hard drive in the security office, with 30 days of retention before older footage was overwritten. I had access to the feeds and to the recordings as part of my job. I sat down at the desk. I pulled up the recording for the east elevator interior camera. I scrubbed back through the past 30 hours of footage. The camera had recorded continuously. The footage showed the elevator interior with the lights on, the car stationary on the first floor, with no movement and no passengers. I scrubbed through the footage at high speed. The car had remained on the first floor for the duration of the previous day's day shift. Carl had cleaned the car at 4:22 p.m. as his log indicated. I could see him in the footage, sweeping and mopping and wiping down the panels. The car had been clean when he had finished. The car had remained clean and stationary through the rest of his shift, through the overnight period, and into the morning of today. At 3:47 p.m. today, the camera footage went black for approximately 4 minutes. The footage resumed at 3:51 p.m. When the footage resumed, the car was on the third floor instead of the first floor, although there was no internal indication that it had moved, because the camera only showed the interior of the car and not any external floor displays. The crumpled coffee cup was on the floor near the back wall. I scrubbed forward. The car remained on the third floor for the rest of the afternoon and into the evening. The car was on the third floor when I arrived for my shift, yet the car had not moved during the time the camera had been operational. The car had moved only during the 4 minutes when the camera had been off. I checked the camera system's log. The log showed no recorded outage. The log showed the camera as continuously operational from the previous afternoon through the present moment. The 4-minute gap I had observed in the footage was not, according to the log, a gap. According to the log, the camera had been recording continuously, with no interruption, during the 4 minutes when the footage was black. I pulled up the cameras for the west elevator interior, the lobby, and the third-floor hallway. I scrubbed to the same time window, between 3:47 p.m. and 3:51 p.m. The west elevator interior footage was normal during that window. The car was stationary on the first floor, which was where it should have been. The lobby footage was normal, the lobby was empty, the lights were on, there was no movement. The third-floor hallway footage was normal. The hallway was empty. The lights were on. No one walked through. The 4-minute gap was specific to the east elevator interior camera. Every other camera in the building had recorded normally during that window. The east elevator camera, which should have shown either the car remaining on the first floor or the car moving to the third floor, had instead shown a black screen, while the system log showed no outage. I sat at the security desk for a long time. I considered my options. The procedure for camera anomalies was to log the anomaly in the maintenance tablet and to email the broker's IT contact in Charleston. Yet the broker's IT contact would respond within 24 hours, usually with a remote diagnostic, and would dispatch a technician if needed. The procedure was clear. The procedure had been followed by Carl on at least one previous occasion in my time at the hospital, when a camera in the cafeteria had glitched and had recorded only audio for about 2 hours. I did not want to follow the procedure. The procedure would create a paper trail. The paper trail would eventually be reviewed by someone at the broker's office, and the someone might decide that the anomaly required the building to be secured at a higher level, which might mean additional shifts for security personnel during overnight hours. Additional security personnel would mean my job description would change. Thus, my job description changing might mean my hours being reduced or my position being eliminated. I needed the hours. I needed the income. I had decided, in the seconds after I noticed the gap in the footage, that I was going to handle the situation myself without escalating it until I had a better understanding of what was happening. I picked up the maintenance tablet. I logged the elevator as a maintenance issue, using the standard language for an elevator that was not responding to call buttons. I did not log the camera gap. I did not mention the coffee cup. I sent the maintenance issue to the broker's office. I received an automated confirmation that a technician would be dispatched the following morning between 8 a.m. and noon. I left the security office. I went back to my normal route, as I had a deep cleaning scheduled for the second-floor patient rooms in the orthopedic wing. I walked to the west elevator and called the car. The car responded normally. I rode it to the second floor. I started my cleaning. The orthopedic wing on the second floor had 28 patient rooms, arranged along a U-shaped corridor with the nurse's station in the middle of the U. The rooms were all empty. The beds had been removed. The floors had been mopped during my previous shift, and tonight's task was to dust the empty shelving and the windowsills and to wipe down the bathroom fixtures with a disinfectant solution. The work was repetitive and quiet. I had developed, in my 14 weeks, a rhythm for it. At 11:43 p.m., I was in room 218, dusting the top shelf of the empty closet. I heard a sound from the corridor, and yet the sound was a rolling sound, the sound of small wheels on tile, the sound of a hospital cart being pushed. I stopped what I was doing. I stood in the room and I listened. The sound continued. The cart was rolling slowly down the corridor. The corridor was tile, and the wheels were small and quiet, and the sound was the kind of sound that was difficult to hear clearly unless the building was completely silent. The building was completely silent. The sound was clear. The cart was moving toward room 218. I want to be precise about the sound. The sound was not the sound of a cleaning cart. My cleaning cart had larger rubber wheels that produced a different, lower-pitched sound. My cleaning cart was also in the corridor outside room 2, 2 doors down from where I was. The cart I was hearing was a different kind of cart. Yet the wheels were smaller and harder, the way the wheels on a medical supply cart are smaller and harder. Designed for maneuverability in tight spaces, and for the kind of precise positioning that medical work requires. The hospital had been emptied of medical equipment in March. The supply carts had been removed during the closure, along with the beds, the IV stands, the diagnostic equipment, and most of the other movable items. The only carts in the building, by my knowledge, were the cleaning carts assigned to me and to Carl, both of which had the larger rubber wheels. The rolling sound stopped outside room 218. I stood in the closet. I did not move. I held the dust cloth in my hand. I waited. The corridor was silent. The cart had stopped, and there was no sound of footsteps, no sound of breathing, no sound of anyone or anything pushing the cart further. The cart was simply parked outside room 218. I considered my options. I could step out of the closet and look into the corridor, which would tell me whether there was a cart there and whether there was a person with the cart. I could stay in the closet and wait, which would tell me nothing, but would keep me out of view of whoever or whatever was in the corridor. I could call security, except there was no security in the building because the building had no security personnel during overnight hours, because the broker had decided that the building's locked perimeter and the camera system were sufficient, and that paying for overnight security would be an unnecessary expense. I could call Carl. I could call the police. I could call the broker's emergency line. Yet I did none of these things. I stood in the closet for approximately 3 minutes by my watch, which was the only timepiece I had on me, and I listened to the silence in the corridor. The cart did not move. There were no other sounds. After 3 minutes, I stepped out of the closet. I walked across room 218 to the doorway. I looked into the corridor. The corridor was empty. There was no cart. There were no people. The corridor was lit by the standard overhead fluorescents, and I could see clearly down the length of the U in both directions. My cleaning cart was where I had left it. 2 doors down, outside room 220. There was nothing else in the corridor. I want to tell you that the rolling sound and the cart had been my imagination. It's that I had been working a quiet shift in an empty building, and that I had heard a building noise that my mind had interpreted as something it was not. I want to tell you this because the alternative is that the cart had been real, that it had rolled down the corridor and stopped outside the room I was in, and that it had then somehow moved or disappeared during the 3 minutes I had spent in the closet, in a way that left no evidence of its presence. I checked the floor of the corridor for any marks or scuffs that a cart might have left. The floor was clean. The floor was the same floor I had mopped 2 nights earlier. There were no marks. I walked to the nurse's station in the middle of the U. The nurse's station had a small computer monitor that displayed, when active, a simplified version of the security camera feeds for the 2nd floor. The monitor was usually off, but it could be turned on with a button on the side. I pressed the button. The monitor came to life. The screen showed a 4-pane view of the 2nd floor camera feeds. The cameras showed the corridors of the orthopedic wing, the cardiac wing across the hall, the central elevator lobby, and the stairwell on the east side. All 4 feeds were normal. The corridors were empty. The lights were on. There were no carts, no people, no movement. I scrolled the monitor's controls back through the past 5 minutes of footage, which the local monitor cached for review purposes. I scrolled the feed for the orthopedic wing corridor. I watched the past 5 minutes at high speed. The corridor in the recording was empty for the entire 5 minutes. There was no cart. There was no person. The footage showed only my cleaning cart, parked outside room 220, where I had left it. The footage did not show me, because the camera was angled to cover the corridor and not the interiors of the rooms. The footage did not show anything that would explain the rolling sound I had heard. I scrolled through the feeds for the other cameras on the second floor. All of them were normal. The other corridors were empty. The elevator lobby was empty. The stairwell was empty. There was no record on any camera on the second floor of a cart being pushed down any corridor in the past 5 minutes. I went back to my cleaning cart. I pushed it down the corridor to room 222, which was the next room on my schedule. I started cleaning. My hands were not steady. I had to stop twice to take breaths. I want to tell you what I think happened in those few minutes between hearing the cart and finding the corridor empty. I think the cart was real, and I think the cameras did not record it, the same way the east elevator camera had not recorded the 4 minutes during which the elevator had moved from the first floor to the third floor. I think the cameras in the building had a pattern of failing to record certain events, and that the failures were not random, and that the events the cameras were failing to record were the events that I was slowly becoming aware of. I think the building had been doing this for some period of time before I had started working there, and that the events had been occurring at intervals that I had not yet identified, and that the events were now occurring during my shift because the building had, in some way, registered my presence and had started to behave in ways that involved me. I did not have any of this in clear, articulated form at the time. What I had was a feeling that the building was no longer just a building. The feeling was not yet fear. The feeling was something more like the feeling you get when you realize that a person you have been talking to has been lying to you about a small thing for a long time, and you are starting to wonder what other things they have been lying about. I checked my watch. It was 12:06 a.m. My shift had 5 hours and 54 minutes left. I finished room 222 at 12:41 a.m. I worked deliberately. I kept my movements normal. I tried not to think about the cart. I focused on the dust cloth and the disinfectant spray and the small repetitive tasks of cleaning a hospital room that had not held a patient in 8 months. I moved to room 224 at 12:42 a.m. The corridor was quiet. I pushed my cleaning cart along with me, the larger rubber wheels making the familiar sound on the tile. I did not hear any other sounds. At 1:07 a.m., the lights in the corridor flickered. The flicker was brief, maybe a second, the kind of flicker that fluorescent lights produce when they are getting old, or when there is a small fluctuation in the building's electrical supply. The hospital had backup power systems that should have prevented any actual outage, but the systems did not prevent flickers. Flickers were normal. I had seen them before, occasionally, in my 14 weeks at the hospital. The flicker happened a second time at 1:09 a.m., then a third at 1:10. The flickers were occurring at 1-minute intervals. They were not random. I stepped out of room 224 into the corridor. I looked at the overhead lights. The lights were the standard linear fluorescent fixtures set into the dropped ceiling with the flat plastic covers that hospitals use. I watched them. At 1:11 a.m., exactly 1 minute after the previous flicker, the lights flickered again. The flicker was the same duration as the previous ones, about 1 second, with a slight dimming that suggested a brief power drop rather than a bulb malfunction. I called Carl. I did not call him because I expected him to help. I called him because I wanted another person to know what was happening, and Carl was the only person who would understand the building well enough to give me an opinion that was based on the building rather than on a generic assumption about lights flickering. Carl picked up on the second ring this time. He was awake. He sounded annoyed. He said, "Aaron, what now?" I told him about the lights. I told him about the 1-minute intervals. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "How long have they been doing it?" I told him 3 flickers so far, with a 4th coming up if the pattern held. He said, "Aaron, listen to me. I'm going to tell you something I should have told you when you started. The lights flicker like that sometimes. It happens maybe once a month. The flickers are always at 1-minute intervals. I said they go for between 15 minutes and an hour, then they stop. The reason I didn't tell you is that I didn't want to make a thing of it. The flickers don't hurt anything. The cameras keep working. The building stays online. It's a thing the building does. It's been doing it since before the closure. We used to get reports about it from the night nurses on the wards. The hospital had electricians come out 4 times to investigate. They never found anything. The electrical system tests fine. The flickers happen anyway. The flickers are not on any meter, not on any monitor, not on any record, except for the people who are in the building when they happen. I asked him what I should do. He said, "Nothing. Wait it out. Don't log it. The broker doesn't know about it because the broker has never been in the building during one. If you log it, the broker will send out an electrician, the electrician will find nothing, and you'll have created a paper trail for nothing. Just wait. The flickers will stop on their own. While they're happening, do me a favor and don't go into the basement. Don't go into the morgue. Don't go into the central plant. Stay on the upper floors. The flickers are worse in the basement. I don't know why. Just stay upstairs." I asked him whether anything else happened during the flickers. I asked him whether the building did anything else during these episodes. Carl was quiet for a long time. He said, "Aaron, are you having a bad night?" I told him about the elevator and the camera gap and the cart. He was quiet for an even longer time. He said, "Okay, I'm going to tell you what I know. I don't know much. And I have been working at this building for 2 years, 6 months as the day shift maintenance. And before that, I worked as a hospital orderly here for 15 years. I was here when it was a working hospital. The building has done things occasionally for as long as I have been associated with it. The doing of things is rare. It happens, by my count, maybe 4 or 5 times a year. The doings have a pattern. The pattern is that they start with the lights flickering at 1-minute intervals. They escalate sometimes to other phenomena, like sounds in empty corridors and equipment moving on its own, and cameras failing to record short windows of time. They de-escalate eventually, and the building goes back to normal. I asked him how long the escalations lasted. He said, the escalations vary. The shortest one I have personally observed lasted about 90 minutes. The longest lasted 6 hours. The longest one was in 2018, when I was still working as an orderly on a night shift in the medical surgical unit. The unit was full that night, 12 patients. The flickers started at around 1 a.m. and went until about 7 a.m. During those 6 hours, we had a series of events on the unit. Call buttons being pressed in empty rooms, the intercom system playing static. One of the patients reported seeing a nurse in her room who was not on staff and who left when she opened her eyes. Another patient died at 4:18 a.m. He had been stable. He had been admitted for an elective procedure the next day. He died of cardiac arrest with no warning signs. Now, the doctors who reviewed the case said it was unrelated to anything that happened during the night. The family accepted that. The family did not know about the flickers. The family did not know about the call buttons or the intercom or the nurse who was not on staff. He paused. He said, "I am telling you because you are in the building during one, and you should know. The escalations do not always involve a death. The death in 2018 was the only one I have direct knowledge of that occurred during one of these episodes. There may have been others. I do not have access to all of the records. The building has been here since 1962. The building has had hundreds of deaths in its history, most of them ordinary, some of them not ordinary. I do not know how many of the not ordinary ones occurred during these episodes. I have not investigated." I asked him what I should do. He said, do your job. Stay on the upper floors. Avoid the basement. Avoid the morgue specifically. The morgue is locked, but the lock is a standard padlock, and the key is on your ring. Do not use the key. Do not enter the morgue under any circumstances tonight. If you need to access the basement for a maintenance issue, call me. I will come in. I will not come in for the lights flickering. I will come in if there is a structural emergency or a fire or something that actually requires response. But if you can avoid the basement, avoid it. Wait the episode out. Finish your shift. Go home. Do not log any of this. The broker does not need to know. The broker would not know what to do with the information. I told him I understood. We hung up. The lights flickered at 1:12 a.m., the fourth flicker. Yeah, the pattern was holding. I want to tell you that I followed Carl's advice. I want to tell you that I stayed on the upper floors and waited the episode out and finished my shift without further incident. I cannot tell you that. I can tell you what actually happened, which involved a maintenance situation that I had not anticipated and that did require me to access the basement, and which I am going to describe now. At 1:23 a.m., 11 flickers into the episode, the maintenance tablet on my cart chimed with a notification. I looked at the screen. The notification was an automated alert from the building management system. The alert said that a water flow sensor in the central plant had detected an anomaly. The alert said the sensor was indicating possible flow loss in the heating loop. Yet the alert said that if the flow loss was confirmed, the heating system would shut down within 15 minutes to prevent equipment damage. The hospital's heating system was a large industrial setup that ran on natural gas and supplied hot water heating to the entire building. The system was monitored continuously by sensors that fed into the building management system. The system had backups and redundancies, but the backups and redundancies required at least basic functionality to operate. A sustained flow loss could cause the boilers to overheat and trip safety shutoffs, which would result in the entire building losing heat. The temperature outside was about 28 degrees, which was cold enough that a heat loss would cause the pipes in the building to start to freeze within a few hours, which would cause the kind of damage that would require significant repair and would possibly cost the broker tens of thousands of dollars and would almost certainly cost me my job. The procedure for a water flow alert was to physically inspect the central plant to determine whether the alert was a false alarm or a real flow loss. The central plant was in the basement. I called Carl. He picked up immediately. I told him about the alert. I told him I had to go to the basement. He said, "Aaron, no. Do not go to the basement during a flicker episode. The alert is probably the building doing the thing. The building does this kind of thing. It generates false alerts during episodes. I have seen this happen. The alerts always turn out to be false. Wait until the flickers stop, then go check the central plant. And the building will have generated the alert, and then the alert will clear on its own. I told him the alert said the heating system would shut down within 15 minutes if the flow loss was real. He said, "The alert is not real. Trust me." I asked him whether he had ever ignored a flow loss alert during an episode. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I have ignored 2 of them. Both turned out to be false. The system did not actually lose flow. The alerts cleared on their own within an hour. I am not saying every alert during an episode is false. I am saying the ones I have personally ignored have been false." I asked him whether he had ever responded to a flow loss alert during an episode. He said, "No, I have not." I sat on the edge of my cleaning cart and I tried to think. The math was bad either way. Well, if I went to the basement and the alert was real, I might be able to prevent the heating loss, but I would be in the basement during a flicker episode, which Carl had specifically told me to avoid. If I did not go to the basement and the alert was real, the heating system would shut down, the building would lose heat, the pipes would freeze, and I would lose my job. If I did not go to the basement and the alert was false, the alert would clear on its own and nothing would happen. The unknown was whether the alert was real. Carl's experience suggested it was probably false, but Carl had only 2 data points, and the data points were not statistically meaningful, and the cost of a false negative was much higher than the cost of a false positive. The cost of a false negative was my job. The cost of a false positive was being in the basement for 30 minutes during a flicker episode. I made a decision. I told Carl I was going to the basement to check. He told me to be careful. He told me to call him when I got back to the upper floors. He told me to call him from the basement if anything happened that I needed to talk through. He told me, finally, to stay out of the morgue under any circumstances. The morgue was at the far end of the basement from the central plant, and the central plant did not require me to pass the morgue, and the morgue was locked, but he wanted to remind me. I told him I understood. I took the stairs. I would not use the elevator. I went down to the first floor, then through the door that led to the basement stairs. The basement stairs were a separate stairwell from the regular building stairs, yet accessible only through a heavy metal door near the loading dock. The door had a keycard reader. I scanned my keycard. The door clicked. I opened it. I went down. The basement was lit by older fluorescent fixtures than the upper floors. The fixtures hummed louder. The hallway at the bottom of the stairs was concrete, with painted lines on the walls indicating which corridor led to which area. The lines were color-coded. Red led to the central plant. Blue led to the morgue. Yellow led to the maintenance shop. Green led to the storage areas. The lines had been painted decades ago and had faded in places. I followed the red line. The central plant was about 200 feet down the corridor behind another keycard-locked door. I walked. The lights flickered at 1:26 a.m., then at 1:27, then at 1:28, as the pattern was still holding. The flickers were more pronounced down here than they had been on the second floor. The dimming was more visible. The recovery was slower. Carl had been right that the flickers were worse in the basement. I reached the central plant door. I scanned my keycard. The door clicked. I opened it. I went inside. The central plant was a large industrial space, maybe 60 feet by 40 feet, with a high ceiling and exposed pipes and ducts running along the walls and overhead. The boilers were 3 large gas-fired units along the east wall. The pumps and the control panels were on the west wall. The center of the room was open, with a concrete floor and the faint smell of natural gas and lubricating oil that all industrial mechanical rooms have. The water flow sensor that had triggered the alert was on the south wall, attached to one of the main pipes coming out of the boiler bank. The sensor had a small LCD display that showed the current flow rate in gallons per minute. The normal flow rate at this time of year, with the heating system running at standard load, was approximately 120 gallons per minute. I walked over to the sensor. The display read 0. The flow was 0. I stood in front of the sensor and I tried to process what the reading meant. The boilers were running. I could hear them. The gas burners were firing. The pumps on the west wall were running. The system was, by every audible indication, operating. But the flow sensor on the south wall was reading 0, which meant either the sensor was malfunctioning or there was a real blockage somewhere between the boilers and the sensor, which could mean a closed valve, a failed pump, or some kind of obstruction in the piping. I checked the valves along the pipe. They were all in their correct positions. The valves were standard ball valves with handles that indicated open or closed positions visually. The handles were all in the open position. I checked the secondary sensor on the same pipe, about 10 feet downstream, which was a backup that was supposed to provide redundancy in case the primary sensor failed. The secondary sensor's display read 122 gallons per minute. The flow was normal. The primary sensor was malfunctioning. I logged the malfunction in the maintenance tablet. I noted that the secondary sensor was reading normal flow, which meant the alert from the primary sensor was a false alarm. I marked the alert as resolved. The tablet sent the resolution to the building management system. The system acknowledged. The 15-minute shutdown countdown was canceled. The total time I had spent in the basement was about 8 minutes. I turned to leave. The lights in the central plant went out. The lights had not flickered. They had simply gone off, all at once, with no warning. The room went completely dark except for the small LCD displays on the various sensors and control panels, which gave off enough faint glow to allow me to see the general shapes of the equipment, but not to navigate confidently. The boilers were still running. I could hear them. The pumps were still running. The mechanical systems had not lost power, only the lights had failed. I checked my watch by holding it close to my face. It was 1:36 a.m. The flicker pattern had been continuing at 1-minute intervals. The next flicker would be at 1:37. I waited. At 1:37, the lights did not come back on. The pattern had broken. The lights stayed off. I had a flashlight on my keychain, a small LED light that I used for inspecting dark spaces during my normal cleaning rounds. I turned it on. The beam was narrow but bright enough to navigate. I started walking toward the door. I was about 10 feet from the door when I heard a sound from the corridor outside. The sound was the rolling sound, the cart sound. The same sound I had heard on the second floor at 11:43 p.m., except louder now, because the basement corridor was concrete and the sound carried better. As the sound was approaching the central plant door, I stopped walking. I turned off the flashlight. I stood in the dark in the central plant. I listened. The cart was rolling slowly down the corridor outside. The sound was the same hard, small wheels, the same medical supply cart, the same steady pace. The cart was coming from the direction of the morgue. The cart stopped outside the central plant door. I stood about 10 feet from the door, in the dark, holding the flashlight in my hand without turning it on. I could see the door faintly because of the thin line of light that came through the gap at the bottom from the corridor outside, where the corridor lights were still on, even though that the central plant lights had gone off. The line of light at the bottom of the door was unbroken. There was no shadow of a person standing on the other side. The cart had arrived without a person pushing it, or the person was standing in a position that did not interrupt the line of light at the bottom of the door, or there was no person at all. The door handle moved. I want to be precise about this. The door was a standard commercial door with a lever handle on both sides. The door was equipped with a key card reader on the corridor side, which was how I had entered. The door could also be opened from the inside without a key card, simply by pushing down on the lever handle. The lever handle on the corridor side was visible to me on the inside of the door because the door had a narrow window of reinforced glass at eye level. The lever handle on the corridor side was moving down, slowly, the way a person would move a lever if they were trying to open the door without the key card. The door did not open. The keycard reader required a valid scan before the door would unlock from the corridor side. The lever handle could be moved, but the door's electronic lock would not release until a valid card was presented to the reader. The handle moved down, paused at the bottom of its travel, and then moved back up to the neutral position. After about 10 seconds, the handle moved down again. The same pattern. Down, pause, up. The door did not open. I stood in the dark and I watched the handle move for what felt like a long time, but was probably about 2 minutes by my watch, which I checked when the movement stopped. At 1:41 a.m., the handle stopped moving. The cart sound resumed in the corridor, and as the cart rolled away from the door in the direction it had come from, back toward the morgue. The sound faded. The corridor was quiet. I waited another 5 minutes by my watch. I did not move. I did not turn on the flashlight. I listened for any further sounds. There were none. At 1:46 a.m., the lights in the central plant came back on. The fluorescent fixtures hummed back to life. The room was illuminated normally. The flicker pattern did not resume. The lights stayed steady. I walked to the door. I looked through the window into the corridor. The corridor was empty. The lights in the corridor were on. There was no cart. There was no person. The corridor looked exactly as it had when I had walked down it 20 minutes earlier. I scanned my key card. The door clicked. I opened it. I stepped into the corridor. The corridor floor had a single mark on it, about 3 feet from the door of the central plant. The mark was a small smudge, the kind a rubber wheel makes when it stops suddenly and slides slightly. The smudge was about 1/2 inch long. The smudge was fresh. The smudge had not been there when I had walked down the corridor 20 minutes earlier, because I would have noticed it on the freshly cleaned floor. The smudge was the only physical evidence I had that the cart had been in the corridor. I took a photograph of the smudge with my phone. I did not know why I was taking the photograph. I was not going to send it to anyone. I was not going to log it in the maintenance tablet. I was taking it because I needed to have evidence of something, anything, that would prove to me later that what had happened had actually happened. And I walked back down the corridor toward the stairs. I did not follow the red line. I followed the wall. I kept my flashlight on, even though the corridor lights were on, because I wanted the additional light. I reached the stairs. I went up. I scanned my key card at the door at the top of the stairs. The door clicked. I went through. I closed the door behind me. I was on the first floor. I was out of the basement. The flicker episode appeared to be over. The corridor lights on the first floor were steady. My watch said 1:53 a.m. I had spent 27 minutes in the basement. I called Carl. He picked up immediately. He said, "Aaron, are you out?" I said yes. He said, "What happened?" I told him about the cart. I told him about the door handle. I told him about the lights going off. He was quiet for a long time. He said, "My Aaron, I am going to tell you something. I have been working at this building for over 17 years. I have never had a cart try to come into a room with me. I have heard the cart in corridors. I have heard it on the upper floors. I have heard it in the basement. I have never had it follow me. I have never had it try to enter a room I was in. I am telling you this because I do not know what it means that this happened to you, and I am worried about it. I am going to come in. I am going to come in now. I will be there in about 40 minutes. Stay on the first floor. Stay near the security office. Do not go anywhere else in the building. Do you understand?" I told him. I understood. He hung up. I went to the security office. I sat down at the desk. I looked at the camera feeds. The basement camera feeds were normal. The corridors were empty. The central plant was empty. The morgue door was closed, and the corridor outside the morgue was empty. There was no cart visible on any feed. I checked the recording for the past 30 minutes. I scrubbed through the basement corridor camera footage. The footage showed me walking down the corridor toward the central plant, entering the central plant, and the door closing behind me. The camera then showed the corridor as empty for the next 20 minutes. There was no cart. There was no movement. The corridor was empty in the footage for the entire time I had been in the central plant. The lights in the corridor did not even flicker in the footage, although I had observed them flickering when I had walked past them on my way in. The footage showed me coming back out of the central plant at 1:46 a.m., looking around, and walking back down the corridor toward the stairs. The footage did not show the smudge on the floor because the camera angle did not include the section of floor where the smudge was located. The cart, again, had not been recorded. I closed the camera feeds. I sat at the security desk and I waited for Carl. I had 37 minutes until he arrived. The building was quiet. The flicker episode appeared to have ended. The cart had returned to wherever it came from. I was alone on the first floor of an empty hospital, in a security office with 47 cameras showing me empty rooms and empty corridors. I made a decision while I was waiting. I decided that I was going to quit. I was going to tell Carl when he arrived. I was going to write my resignation when I got home. I was going to find another job. I would not work another shift in this building. The risk was no longer acceptable. I had reached this decision based on the cart trying to enter the central plant. The cart had, as far as Carl knew, never tried to enter a room with a person in it before. The cart was, by Carl's description, escalating its behavior in ways that involved me specifically. I did not understand the mechanism. I did not know whether quitting would resolve my involvement or whether the building's interest in me would continue after I left. I knew only that continuing to work in the building would expose me to more episodes, and that the episodes would, by every indication, continue to escalate. I stood up. I went to the bathroom in the security office. I splashed water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired, and I looked older than I had looked at the start of my shift. I went back to the desk. I sat down. I waited. Carl arrived at 2:31 a.m. He let himself in through the loading dock door, scanned his key card, came down the corridor to the security office. He looked tired, too. He sat down across from me. He said, "Tell me again. Slow. Every detail." I told him again. I went through the entire night. I started with the elevator on the 3rd floor and the conversation we had had about it. I went through the camera gap and the coffee cup. I went through the rolling sound on the 2nd floor and the empty corridor afterward. I went through the flicker pattern and the alert from the central plant and my decision to go down to the basement. I went through the lights going off and the cart approaching the door and the handle moving. I went through the smudge on the floor. I told him I had taken a photograph of the smudge. I showed him the photograph on my phone. Carl looked at the photograph. He zoomed in. He studied it. He said, "That's a wheel mark from a medical supply cart. The kind we used to use on the wards. We had about 40 of them in the hospital before the closure. Yet they were inventoried in March and shipped to the company's other facilities. There should not be any of them in this building." I asked him whether any could have been missed. He said, "Possibly. The inventory was rushed because the closure happened fast. A few items might have been left behind, but none of them have shown up in any of my cleaning rounds, and I have been through every accessible room in this building at least twice. If a cart had been left behind, I would have found it by now." He set the phone down. He said, "Aaron, I have to tell you something. I have not been completely honest with you. The flicker episodes, the carts, the camera gaps. I told you I have observed these things over the years. That is true. I did not tell you the full pattern. The full pattern is that the events are not random, and the events follow a schedule. The schedule is approximately every 3 months. The last episode before tonight was on August 14th, which was 2 months and 3 weeks ago. The episode before that was on May 22nd. The episode before that was on February 28th, which was about 2 weeks before the hospital closed. The intervals between episodes are not exactly 3 months, but they cluster in that range. I have been keeping a log on my home computer. The log goes back 4 years. He paused. He said, "Tonight's episode is not on the schedule. Tonight's episode is early. The next one was supposed to be in late January. I do not know what made tonight happen earlier than the pattern. I have been thinking about it since you called me about the lights. The only thing I can think of that is different about tonight is that you noticed the elevator on the 3rd floor. I do not know whether your noticing was the cause or the effect, but I think the building has, for some reason, decided to do something with you tonight that it has not done before." I asked him whether he had told the broker about any of this. He said, "No, I have not told the broker anything. I have, in the 4 years I have been logging episodes, never reported any of them. The broker would not understand. The broker would possibly decide that the building was unsuitable for sale and would liquidate it through some kind of distressed asset auction, which would mean my job would end. I have a wife and 3 children. I cannot afford to lose this job. Yet I have been hoping the building would sell to a buyer who would gut it for renovation, and that the renovation would in some way change whatever has been happening here. I have been hoping that my silence would last long enough for the sale to occur and for me to be reassigned to a different property by the broker. I am being honest with you because you have had a worse night than I have ever had in this building, and you deserve to know that I have been keeping things from you." I asked him what he thought I should do. He said, "I think you should quit. I think you should not come back. I think tonight was the building telling you that you are involved in some way, that the previous shifts have not been involved. I do not know what the involvement means. I do not know whether quitting will end it, and I am sorry I cannot give you better advice. The honest answer is that I do not know what is happening in this building, and I have not known for 4 years, and I have been managing my exposure by maintaining my routine and not noticing things. You have noticed things tonight that I have spent 4 years not noticing. The not noticing has worked for me. I do not know whether it would work for you now. I told him I had already decided to quit. I told him I was going to write my resignation in the morning. He nodded. He said he understood. He looked at his watch. He said, "It's 2:47. You have 3 hours and 13 minutes left in your shift. I am going to stay with you for the rest of the shift. I am going to call the broker in the morning and tell them I am taking over your hours for the next 2 weeks while they find a replacement. I am going to bill them for the additional time. They will not question it because I have never asked for anything before. I am going to do this because you should not be alone in this building for the rest of the night, and because finishing the shift is, by my judgment, safer than leaving early. If you leave early, you will have to come back to clean out your locker and turn in your key card, and the coming back will be its own exposure. If you finish the shift, you do everything in one night, and you do not have to come back for any reason. I think this is the right approach. Do you agree?" I agreed. I did not want to come back. We did not do any cleaning for the rest of the shift. Carl said the cleaning could wait. He said he would catch it up over the next 2 weeks. We sat in the security office. We watched the camera feeds. We talked occasionally about other things. He told me about his children. He told me about his wife's job at a school in town. He told me about how he had ended up working at the hospital, first as an orderly, then as the day shift maintenance after the closure, because the closure had eliminated his orderly position, and the broker had offered him the maintenance role as a kind of severance arrangement that had turned into a permanent job. The flicker pattern did not resume. The camera feeds remained normal. The cart did not return, on any camera, on any floor. The building, by all available indicators, had returned to its baseline state. At 5:54 a.m., Carl told me to clock out, and he said he would handle the shift change paperwork. I clocked out at the console outside the security office. I went to my locker in the staff break room. I took out my personal items. I put them in a small bag. I went back to the security office. I gave Carl my key card. I shook his hand. He told me he was sorry. He told me he would call me later in the week to check on me. He told me, finally, that he was going to think hard about whether to keep working at the hospital himself, and that the conversations of tonight had made him reconsider his approach. He did not say what he was going to do. He said he needed time. I left the building through the main entrance. I walked across the parking lot to my car. The sun was not yet up. The air was cold. My breath made small clouds in the dim light from the parking lot lamps. Yeah, my car was the only vehicle in the lot besides Carl's truck. I got in, I started the engine. I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes, letting the engine warm up, looking at the building. The hospital was a 4-story brick structure with rows of dark windows. The exterior lights were on, illuminating the facade. The building looked, from the outside, like an empty hospital that was being maintained for future sale. There was nothing about the exterior that would have suggested anything I had experienced inside. I drove home. I arrived at my house at 6:22 a.m. My wife was awake, getting ready for work. My daughter was still asleep. I told my wife I had quit my job. I did not give her details. I told her there had been a problem at the hospital and that I was not going back. She was concerned but accepting. Yet she knew I had been uncomfortable at the job for some time, although I had not told her why. She told me we would figure out the income situation. She kissed me. She left for work. I went to bed. I slept until early afternoon. I woke up. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. I opened my laptop. I wrote my resignation email to the broker's office. The email was brief. The email said that I was resigning effective immediately, that personal circumstances required the change, and that I appreciated the opportunity to have worked at the property. I did not mention any of the specific events of the previous night. I sent the email. I received an automated acknowledgement within minutes. I want to tell you what I have done in the days since. I want to tell you what I have learned from talking to other people and from my own follow-up, and from a phone call I received from Carl that I have been thinking about for the past week. The first thing I did, 2 days after I quit, was call the broker's office in Charleston. I asked to speak to the property manager. I was connected to a woman named Linda Aragon, who I had emailed with several times over my 14 weeks at the hospital, but had never spoken to in person. Linda was friendly. She thanked me for my service. She asked whether there had been any specific issues that had prompted my resignation. I gave her the same vague answer I had given my wife. She did not press. I asked her, in the casual way that you ask things when you are trying to gather information without revealing your reasons for wanting it, how the sale of the property was progressing. Linda said the sale was proceeding normally. She said there was an interested buyer who was conducting due diligence. She said the buyer was a regional health network that was considering reopening the facility as a smaller operation. She said the timeline for the sale was approximately 4 to 6 months, depending on the due diligence process. I asked her whether the buyer had toured the property. She said yes, several times. I asked her whether the tours had been during business hours. She said yes, with one exception. She said the buyer had requested an overnight visit in order to evaluate the building's nighttime conditions for staffing purposes if they reopened it as a hospital. The overnight visit had been scheduled for the previous week, on the night of October 22nd. The visit had been canceled at the last minute by the buyer. Linda said she did not know why. She said the buyer's representative had called her at 5 p.m. on October 22nd to cancel and had rescheduled for some date in the future that had not yet been set. I asked her whether the buyer had given any reason for the cancellation. She said the representative had told her that there had been a scheduling conflict on the buyer's end. She said she had assumed the conflict was real. She said she had not pressed for details. I asked her whether the buyer's overnight visit, if it had occurred, would have happened during my shift. She said yes. She said she had been planning to email me the previous Monday to let me know that there would be visitors in the building that night, but that the visit had been canceled before she had sent the email. The visit had been scheduled for the night of October 22nd. Tonight's incident, the flicker episode, the cart, the door handle, had occurred on the night of October 29th. The visit had been canceled 6 days before tonight's events. The cancellation had not been explained. I want to be careful about how I draw connections between these things. I do not have evidence that the cancellation was related to anything supernatural. The cancellation might have been a routine business decision by the buyer. The buyer might have been busy. The buyer might have decided that an overnight visit was unnecessary at this stage of the due diligence process. I cannot rule out any of these explanations, but I find the timing notable. The buyer's representative had called Linda at 5 p.m. on October 22nd to cancel. The flicker episode I had experienced was, by Carl's records, early. Carl's pattern said the next episode should have been in late January. The episode had occurred 2 months early. The timing of the early episode was, by my count, exactly 1 week after the canceled overnight visit. The visit, if it had occurred, would have been on a Friday night. The episode had occurred on the following Tuesday, which was the next overnight shift, after the Friday and Saturday and Sunday and Monday during which the building had been unoccupied or only minimally occupied. I do not know what to make of the timing. I am noting it because it is one of the only data points I have for trying to understand what happened. The second thing I did was call Carl 3 days after I quit. I called him in the late afternoon when he would have been off shift. He picked up. He sounded different. He said he had been planning to call me. He said he had something to tell me. He said, "Aaron, I am quitting too. I gave my notice this morning. I am working through the next 2 weeks, and then I am done. I have a job lined up at the high school in town as a custodian. The pay is less than the broker is paying me, but the job is during normal hours, and the building is full of people during the day, and at night, the school has a security guard who works the night shift." I asked him what had made him decide. He said, 2 things. The first was you. I have been thinking about what happened to you on Tuesday, and about my own role in not preparing you for it, and about whether I have been managing my own exposure by withholding information from people who needed it. I have been doing that for 4 years. I have not felt good about it. Now, Tuesday was the first time I had to face it directly. I did not handle it well. I am going to make better choices going forward, starting with not putting myself in situations where I have to make those calculations. He paused. He said, "The second thing happened on Wednesday night, the night after you quit. I worked your shift. I was alone in the building for the full overnight. The flicker episode did not resume. The cart did not appear. The cameras did not gap. The building was, by every measure I observed, completely normal. I did my normal cleaning rounds. I checked the spaces I had been avoiding for years. I checked the basement. I went all the way to the morgue door. I did not open it. I did not go in. But I stood outside it for a few minutes. I listened. I heard nothing. The building was, on Wednesday night, it's a normal empty building." He paused again. He said, "But on Thursday night, I worked again. I did the same routine. I went to the basement again. I went to the central plant. While I was in the central plant, I heard the cart in the corridor. I heard the door handle move. The same pattern as Tuesday. I had the lights on. I had my flashlight. The door handle moved while I was watching it. The cart was outside the door. I stayed in the central plant for 90 minutes until the cart sound moved away. When I came out, there was a smudge on the floor. The same kind of smudge as Tuesday. The smudge was in the same place. The cart had come to the same place and waited at the same door. I asked him what he thought it meant. He said, "I think the building has decided that it is interested in whoever is doing the maintenance work. I think it was interested in you on Tuesday because it was your shift. I think it was interested in me on Thursday because I was the one in the building. I think the previous 4 years of episodes followed a different pattern because the building was being used by a hospital staff during those years, and the staff was a moving group of people, and the building did not focus on any individual. After the closure, the staff was reduced to me, working alone during the day. I was, until you started in mid-July, the only consistent presence in the building. The episodes during the period after the closure were, by my log, less frequent than the episodes during the years before the closure. I thought the reduction in frequency meant the building was settling down. I now think the reduction in frequency meant the building was concentrating its activity on the person who was most consistently present, which was me. And then you started, and the building had 2 consistent presences, and the building has now, in the past week, made it clear that it is interested in both of us." I asked him what he was going to do. He said, "I am going to finish my 2 weeks. I am going to do the minimum work required. I am not going to go to the basement again. I am going to keep the cleaning to the upper floors and the lobby. The broker can do the basement themselves after I am gone. I am going to take the job at the high school. I am going to try to forget about the hospital. I do not know whether forgetting will work. I do not know whether the building will retain interest in me after I leave. Ish, I have decided to find out the same way you are finding out, which is to leave and to see what happens. I asked him whether he would let me know what happens. He said yes. He said he would call me in a few months. I have not heard from Carl since that call. The call was 8 days ago. I have called him twice. He has not picked up. The calls have gone to voicemail. I have not left messages because I did not want to ask in a voicemail what I am asking. The third thing I did was talk to my wife. I told her 4 days after I quit the full version of what had happened. I told her about the elevator and the camera gap and the cart and the door handle. I told her about Carl's history with the building and his log of episodes. I told her about the canceled buyer visit and the timing and what Carl had told me about Thursday night. Yet my wife listened. She did not interrupt. When I was done, she said, "Aaron, I want you to talk to a doctor." She did not say it in an accusatory way. She said it in a careful, loving way. She said it because she was concerned about me, because she did not want to dismiss what I had described, but also because she recognized that some of what I had described was the kind of thing that, if reported by a person without context, would suggest that the person was experiencing some kind of stress-related cognitive symptom. She told me that we did not have to decide right away whether what I had experienced had been real or had been some other kind of event, and that talking to a doctor would, in either case, be useful. She told me she would go with me to the appointment if I wanted. I made an appointment with my primary care doctor. The appointment was 3 days later. I went. I told the doctor I had been experiencing a stressful work situation that had ended with my resigning, and that I wanted to make sure I was managing the stress in a healthy way. I did not give him specific details. I let him do his standard intake. He asked me about sleep, appetite, mood, energy. I gave him honest answers. He said that my symptoms were within the normal range for someone who had recently undergone a significant work transition, and that he did not see any indication of a serious cognitive or psychiatric issue, but that he could refer me to a counselor if I wanted to talk through the experience with a professional. I accepted the referral. I have an appointment with the counselor next week. I am telling you about the doctor visit because I want to be honest about the fact that I have considered seriously the possibility that what I experienced at the hospital was some kind of stress response. I have considered the possibility that the cart was an auditory hallucination. I have considered the possibility that the door handle moving was something I imagined. I have considered the possibility that the camera gaps were technical issues that I attributed to supernatural causes because I was already primed to interpret the situation that way. I have considered all of these possibilities. I have, in the end, rejected them. I have rejected them because the smudge on the floor outside the central plant was a physical mark that was not there before the cart and was there after. And because the photograph I took of the smudge is on my phone, and because Carl independently observed the same phenomenon 2 nights later in a way that confirmed the pattern. I have rejected the explanations because the math of multiple witnesses observing the same impossible event under different conditions, with physical evidence, does not support a stress hallucination explanation. I have rejected them because if the events were stress hallucinations, Carl's experience on Thursday night would have been a coincidence, and the coincidence would require its own explanation that I do not have. I am also aware that my insistence on the events being real is exactly what a person experiencing a stress hallucination would say. I am aware of the circular logic. I am going to talk to the counselor next week, and I am going to listen to what the counselor says. I am going to take the question seriously in the way that my wife asked me to, but I am also going to record this story. I am going to record it because I believe it happened. I am going to record it because I think the next person who takes the maintenance job at the hospital deserves to know, at minimum, that the previous two people quit within a week of each other, and that the reasons for their resignations involved events in the building that they could not explain. I am going to record it because I want the recording to exist in case something happens later that I need to refer back to. I am going to record it because I have, in the past week, started to notice things in my own house that I had not noticed before. And I want to put my account of the hospital on the record before whatever is happening at home progresses to the point where I cannot trust my own observations as clearly as I can trust them now. The things in my house are small. They are the kind of things that I would normally dismiss. The motion sensor light on my front porch has gone on twice in the past week, late at night, with no visible cause. My phone has registered 3 missed calls from numbers that, when I called them back, did not exist. The refrigerator has hummed at a different pitch, briefly, on 3 separate occasions, in a pattern that I noticed because I happened to be in the kitchen each time. None of these things, individually, would mean anything. None of them, in any other context, would I have given a second thought to. And I have given them thought because they have begun to occur in patterns that are, by my count, similar to the patterns I observed in the hospital. The motion light has gone on at 1-minute intervals on both occasions, 2 flashes, then nothing. The missed calls have come at 3:41 a.m., the same time each night. The refrigerator hum has occurred during the same 1-hour window in the late afternoon. The patterns are not yet conclusive. The patterns are early enough that they could still be coincidence. I am watching them. I am writing them down. My daughter has not, as far as I know, observed anything unusual. My wife has not observed anything she has mentioned to me. The patterns, for now, appear to be specific to me. I do not know what this means. I do not know whether the building's interest in me, which Carl described as the building deciding it was interested in whoever was doing maintenance, has continued after my resignation. I do not know whether the interest is now expressing itself in my home through whatever mechanism the interest uses. I do not know whether the patterns will escalate or remain at their current low level, or fade out over the coming weeks. I have decided to give it 3 months. I have decided that if the patterns escalate during the 3 months, I will move. I have not told my wife about this plan. I have not, for that matter, told her about the patterns. I am keeping the patterns to myself for now, the way I kept information from my wife during my time at the hospital, in the same protective rationalization that I now recognize was in part a way of avoiding difficult conversations that I did not want to have. I am going to tell her, in the next few days, I am going to tell her about the patterns and about my plan to move if they escalate. I am going to ask her to help me decide what to do. I have learned from the hospital that withholding information from the people who depend on me is not a strategy that produces good outcomes. I am going to do better. I told my wife 2 days after I recorded the previous part of this story. I did it on a Saturday morning, after our daughter had left for a friend's house for the day. I told her about the motion sensor light, the missed calls, the refrigerator hum. I told her about the 3:41 a.m. timing. I told her about my plan to give it 3 months and to move if the patterns escalated. She listened. She did not interrupt. When I was done, she said, "Aaron, we are going to give it 2 weeks, not 3 months. If anything in this house does anything else that follows a pattern, we are leaving. We are renting somewhere temporary. We are taking Madeline with us. We are not waiting to see whether something escalates while our daughter is in the house." I agreed with her. I agreed faster than I had expected to. I think part of me had been waiting for someone to make that decision for me, because I had not been able to make it myself. We made a plan. The plan involved her starting to look at short-term rental properties in the area that afternoon, and me starting to compile a list of what we would need to take with us if we had to leave on short notice. The plan included a conversation with our daughter about what we were doing, in a version that did not include the supernatural elements, but that made it clear that we were considering a move and that we wanted her to be prepared for it. We had that conversation with Madeline on Sunday evening, when she got home from her friend's house. She took it well. She is 16. She asked practical questions about her school and her friends and how a move would affect her. Yet we answered her questions honestly, within the limits we had set for ourselves. She was not happy about the prospect of moving, but she was not opposed to it either. She told us she trusted us to make the right decision. The 2 weeks passed without incident. The motion light did not go on again. The phone did not register any more missed calls from non-existent numbers. The refrigerator hummed at its normal pitch. By the end of the second week, I had begun to wonder whether I had been wrong about the patterns, whether I had been seeing significance in coincidences, whether the doctor's suggestion that I had been experiencing a stress response had been correct after all. I told my wife this on the Friday at the end of the second week. She said she had been wondering the same thing. She said she was glad nothing else had happened. She said we should keep the rental options open for another month, just in case, but that we could relax some of the heightened attention we had been paying. That night, I had a phone call from Carl. The call came at 9:47 p.m. I had not heard from Carl in 3 weeks. I picked up. He sounded tired, the way he had sounded the night he had come into the hospital to sit with me through the rest of my last shift. He said, "Aaron, I am sorry I have not called. I have been dealing with some things." I asked him how he was. He said, "I am okay. I finished my 2 weeks at the hospital. I started at the high school the Monday after. The high school job is fine. The work is what I expected. The pay is less, but the hours are during the day, and I am not alone in the building. And I have been sleeping better than I slept during the 4 years at the hospital." I asked him about the building. I asked him whether the broker had hired a replacement. Carl was quiet for a moment. He said, "The broker hired a replacement, a man named David Hodgson. He started about 10 days ago. He worked one shift. The shift was on a Tuesday. He did not come back for his second shift. He sent the broker an email on the Wednesday morning, resigning, with no notice, and he did not return any of the broker's calls. The broker called me and asked whether I would be willing to come back temporarily until they could find another replacement. I told the broker no. I asked him whether he knew what had happened during David Hodgson's shift. Carl said, "I do not know directly. I do not have any contact with David. Yes, the broker did not share the contents of his resignation email with me. I have, however, been monitoring the building from a distance. I still have access to the camera feeds. The broker has not removed my access. I think they forgot. I have been checking the feeds in the evenings, on the days when I know the maintenance worker is supposed to be there. I checked the feeds on the night David Hodgson worked. I want to tell you what I saw. I told him to tell me. He said, David arrived at 10 p.m. He clocked in at the security console. He did his initial walkthrough. The camera showed him moving normally through the first floor and then up to the second floor. He started his cleaning rounds in the medical surgical wing. At 11:19 p.m., the camera in the second floor corridor went black. The blackout lasted about 40 seconds. When the camera came back on, David was visible in the corridor, standing still, looking down the hallway in the direction of the elevators. He stood there for about 3 minutes without moving. Then he walked very slowly back toward the stairs. He did not pick up his cleaning cart. He left the cart in the corridor. He went down the stairs to the first floor. He went to the security office. He sat at the desk for about 40 minutes, doing nothing visible on the camera. At 12:07 a.m., he stood up, gathered his personal items, walked out through the loading dock door, and got in his car and left. He did not clock out. He did not return his key card. The broker received his resignation email at 7 a.m. on Wednesday morning. I asked Carl what he thought David had seen during the 40-second blackout. Carl said, "I do not know." Janet, the pattern of the blackout matches the pattern from your shift on October 29th. The cameras black out for short windows when the building is doing something. I think the building did something to David in the corridor during those 40 seconds. I think whatever it did was sufficient to make him leave the building immediately and not come back. I think the building has continued to escalate its behavior with each new maintenance worker, the way it escalated with you compared to me. David did not even make it through one full shift. You made it 14 weeks. I made it 4 years before tonight's events would have happened to me. The escalation is real. The escalation is, by my best estimate, going to continue with whoever the broker hires next. I asked him whether he had told the broker any of this. He said, "No, I have not. Yet I am not going to. I have made my peace with my decision to leave the broker uninformed. The broker is a corporate entity that owns hundreds of properties and that would not, in any meaningful sense, act on the information I could provide. The broker would possibly decide that I was unstable and would terminate my consulting access to the camera feeds, and I would lose the ability to monitor the situation. I have decided that monitoring is more important than reporting. I am going to continue to monitor for as long as I have access. I am going to keep notes. I am going to call you when something happens that I think you should know about." He paused. He said, "Aaron, the reason I am calling you tonight is that I have been monitoring the building since David quit. The broker has not yet hired another replacement. And the building has been unoccupied for the past 9 days in terms of the maintenance shift. The broker has been sending a security company through twice a day for spot checks, which is what they are required to do for insurance purposes when a property is vacant. The security company sends a guard for about 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the evening. Other than those visits, the building has been empty." He paused again. He said, "The cameras have been recording. I have been checking them in the evenings. For the first 7 days after David left, the cameras were normal. The building was empty, and the cameras showed an empty building. Nothing happened. The flicker pattern did not occur. The cart did not appear. The camera gaps did not happen. The building was, by every visible indication, dormant." He paused once more. He said, "Tonight, the cameras showed something different. I want to be careful about how I describe it because I'm not certain about what I saw. And the camera feeds are low resolution, and the building is dimly lit at night. And I have been spending a lot of time looking at these feeds in a way that may have affected my interpretation. With those caveats noted, I will tell you what I think I saw. I told him to tell me." He said, "At 3:41 a.m. tonight, the camera in the second-floor corridor of the medical surgical wing showed a figure standing in the hallway. The figure was a man. The figure was wearing the kind of work uniform that the maintenance staff wears. Dark pants, a polo shirt with the broker's logo, work boots. And the figure was standing in the position where David Hodgson had been standing on the night of his only shift after the blackout had ended. The figure was facing the direction of the elevators. The figure was not moving. He said, "Aaron." The figure was, by the resolution of the camera and the lighting conditions, a man of approximately the same height and build as you. The figure was not, as far as I could tell, David Hodgson. David Hodgson was shorter than you and had a different build. The figure on the camera tonight could have been you. It could also have been any number of other men of similar height and build. I am not telling you this to suggest that it was you. I am telling you because the figure was wearing the uniform you wore and was standing in a position you would have stood in during a normal shift, and it was on the second floor of the medical surgical wing, which was where you were on the night of October 29th when you heard the cart for the first time. I sat in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, and I tried to understand what Carl was telling me. I asked him how long the figure had been visible. He said, "The figure was visible for about 2 minutes. The figure did not move during those 2 minutes." At 3:43 a.m., the camera blacked out for approximately 20 seconds. When the camera came back on, the figure was gone. The corridor was empty. The camera continued to record normally for the rest of the night. There has been no further activity. I asked him whether the figure had appeared on any other cameras. He said, "No, I checked all of the feeds for the same time window. The figure appeared only on the second floor corridor camera. The figure did not enter or exit the corridor on any visible camera. The figure was simply present in the corridor for 2 minutes, and then absent after a brief blackout. The figure did not, by the camera evidence, walk into or out of the corridor through any of the visible entrances." I asked Carl what he thought it meant. He was quiet for a long time. He said, "Aaron, I do not know. I have been thinking about it since I saw the footage. I have a theory. The theory is that the building, in its current dormant state, with no maintenance worker assigned to it, is doing something that involves the people who have previously worked the maintenance shift. I think the building has, in some way, retained an impression of you and of David Hodgson, and possibly of me. Although I have not yet seen any figure that resembles me. I think the building is producing these impressions in the spaces where we worked. I think the impressions are not conscious entities. I think they are residual patterns. I think they are the building's way of marking where its previous workers were." He paused. He said, "I am also aware that this theory is one of several possible theories, and that I have no way of testing it, and that the alternative theories are not less plausible than mine, and that some of them are more disturbing. I am telling you the theory I am most comfortable with. I am not telling you it is correct." I asked him whether he was going to keep monitoring. He said yes. He said he would keep monitoring for as long as he had access, and he said he would call me again if anything else happened that involved a figure resembling me, or that involved any other pattern that he thought I should know about. He told me to take care of myself. He told me to take care of my family. He said he was sorry that the work had ended up costing me as much as it had cost me. He said he hoped the patterns at my house would continue to be quiet, and that the absence of new patterns over the past 2 weeks was a sign that the building's interest in me had faded. We hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after the call. My wife came in around 11 p.m. on her way to bed. She saw me at the table. She asked who had called. I told her. I told her what Carl had said. I told her about the figure on the camera. She listened. When I was done, she said, "Aaron, we are going to leave." And I said, we agreed to wait 2 weeks. The 2 weeks are up. Nothing has happened here. She said, "Nothing has happened here that we have noticed. That does not mean nothing has happened. The building has produced a figure on a camera that resembles you. The building is, by every account we have, capable of doing things that do not appear on cameras at all. The fact that nothing has appeared in our home does not mean nothing is in our home. It means we have not seen anything. I am not willing to continue making decisions based on the assumption that what we can see is the full extent of what is happening. We are going to leave. I have already found a rental property in a town about 40 minutes from here. The property is available next week. I have called the agent, I have put down a deposit. I did this 2 days ago, and I was going to tell you tonight. The phone call from Carl has, I think, made the decision easier. I asked her where the rental was. She told me. The town was a place we had visited a few times over the years, a small town with a good high school and a community feel. The rental was a 3-bedroom house with a yard. The lease was for 1 year, with an option to extend. She said, "We are going to move next week. We are going to put this house up for rent, not for sale, so that we have somewhere to come back to if we decide that the move was unnecessary. We are going to pay both rents for a few months until we are sure of what we want to do. We can afford it. We have the savings. The savings are for situations like this. I have already talked to Madeline. She is okay with it. And she has friends in the new town from a summer camp she went to last year. She is willing to switch schools." I sat at the table and I tried to absorb what she was telling me. She had made the decision. She had made it without me. She had made it because she had recognized, in a way I had not been able to recognize, that the cost of waiting was greater than the cost of acting. She had taken the action while I had been still considering it. I felt, in that moment, both grateful and ashamed. The shame was that I had not been the one to make the decision. The gratitude was that she had been. I told her I agreed. I told her I would help with the move. I told her I would call the broker and have them shut off the utilities at this house once we were out, except for the minimum needed to maintain the property for renting. She said, "Nah, I have already called the broker. I have already arranged the utilities. I have already talked to the property management company about renting the house. I did all of this in the past 2 days. I was going to tell you tonight. I am sorry I did not include you in the planning. I made a judgment that you were not in a position to make these decisions clearly, and that I needed to make them on behalf of the family. I hope you understand." I told her I understood. I told her I was sorry I had put her in the position of having to make the decisions alone. I told her I would do better going forward. We moved the following Friday. The move was straightforward. We took our personal belongings and our daughter's belongings and the things we used regularly. We left most of the furniture because the rental property was furnished. Yeah, we left the appliances. We left the things that would have been a hassle to move and that the property management company could maintain for us until we decided what to do with the house long term. The new house is fine. The new town is fine. Madeline started at the new high school the Monday after our move. She has been making friends. She seems happy. My wife has been commuting to her job, which is a longer drive than before, but is manageable. I have been looking for new work. I have an interview next week at a manufacturing facility in the area that pays slightly better than the hospital had paid. Nothing has happened in the new house. The motion light, if there is one, has not gone on at unusual times. The phone has not registered missed calls from non-existent numbers. The refrigerator has hummed at its normal pitch. Yet the patterns I had observed at the old house have not, to my knowledge, followed me to the new one. I have been keeping watch for them. I have not seen them. Carl called me 2 more times in the weeks after our move. The first call was to tell me that the broker had hired another maintenance worker, a woman named Patricia Dyer, and that she had worked 3 shifts before quitting. Carl had monitored her shifts on the cameras. He had observed flicker episodes during all 3 of her shifts. He had observed the cart on the 2nd shift. He had observed a camera blackout on the 3rd shift, after which Patricia had walked out of the building, gotten in her car, and driven away without returning her keycard or sending any kind of resignation. The broker had reported her car as found abandoned on the side of a highway about 90 miles from the hospital 3 days after her last shift. Patricia had not been at her home. Her family had reported her missing. The case was open. Carl had not contacted the broker or the police with the information he had from the cameras. He had decided that contacting them would not produce useful results and would, possibly, draw attention to himself in ways he was not willing to accept. The second call was to tell me that the broker had stopped trying to find a maintenance worker for the building. The broker had decided, after Patricia's case, that the building would be maintained by the security company on a daily inspection basis, with deep cleaning to be performed by an outside contractor on an as-needed basis when buyers requested tours. Carl said the broker had mentioned, in a casual conversation with him, that the building had developed a reputation in the local maintenance industry as a place where workers tended to quit quickly, and that the broker was having difficulty filling the position, and that the cost of the security company arrangement was actually lower than the cost of a full-time maintenance worker. Carl said the broker did not seem aware of any pattern beyond the difficulty in retaining workers. Carl said the broker had not asked him for any explanation. The hospital is currently for sale. The broker is still trying to find a buyer. The regional health network that had been considering reopening it has, according to Carl's last call, withdrawn from due diligence and is no longer interested. The broker has lowered the asking price twice in the past 2 months. There are currently no active offers. The building sits empty, except for the security company's daily inspections, in the same condition it has been in since March. Carl called me one final time, 2 weeks ago, to tell me he was going to stop monitoring the cameras. He said the broker had finally noticed that his access had not been removed, and the broker had revoked it. Carl said this was, in some way, a relief. He said the monitoring had been taking a toll on him, and that he had been spending too many evenings looking at empty corridors and waiting for something to happen, and that the loss of access was forcing him to step back in a way he had been unable to step back voluntarily. He said he was going to focus on his job at the high school. He said he was going to try to forget about the hospital. He said he was sorry he could not keep me updated on what was happening in the building, and that I would have to find my own way to peace with the situation. I have not heard from Carl since. I have not called him. I have decided to respect his desire to disengage. I am also trying to disengage. I am looking for work. I am settling into the new town. I am being a good husband and a good father. I am trying to put the hospital behind me. The patterns have not returned. The new house is quiet. The phone is quiet. The lights are quiet. Whatever interest the building had in me, if it had interest, appears to have faded with my distance from it. I do not know whether the fading is permanent. I do not know whether the building will, at some point in the future, find some new way to involve me. I do not know whether the figure Carl saw on the camera in the medical surgical wing was related to me in any meaningful sense, or whether it was a residual pattern of the kind he theorized, or whether it was something else entirely that happened to resemble me by coincidence. I do not know any of these things. I am trying to be okay with not knowing. If you ever take a maintenance job at a hospital that has been recently closed, and the previous shift worker tells you that the building has quirks that you do not need to worry about, please ask the previous shift worker for specifics. Ask them whether they have a log. Ask them whether the quirks have a pattern. Ask them whether anyone has quit the job before you, and how quickly, and what they said about why. The questions will not, by themselves, protect you from anything. The questions will, however, give you information that the previous shift worker has been keeping to themselves for reasons that are probably understandable, but that are not in your interest. The information may help you make a better decision about whether to take the job in the first place, or how long to stay, or what to do when the building begins to do the things the previous worker described as quirks. I should have asked Carl more questions. I should have asked him whether the elevator on the 3rd floor was unusual. I should have asked him whether the camera gaps were a known issue. I should have asked him whether the cart was something other workers had heard. I did not ask. I assumed, the way new employees assume, that the previous worker would have told me anything important. The previous worker did not. The previous worker had his own reasons for not telling me. The previous worker has been honest with me about those reasons since, and I have, in my own conversations with him, found his reasons understandable. The reasons being understandable does not change the fact that I made decisions in the building based on incomplete information, and that some of those decisions might have been different if I had known more. The building is still on the market. The asking price is, as of the last time I checked, $375,000 below the original asking price from March. The listing has been on commercial real estate sites for over 8 months. The listing photographs show a clean, well-maintained 4-story brick hospital in a rural part of West Virginia, ready for a buyer to renovate or to reopen. The photographs do not show the figure that has, by Carl's account, appeared in the 2nd floor corridor at 3:41 a.m. on multiple nights since the building has been unoccupied. The photographs do not show the cart that has, by my account and by Carl's account, rolled through the corridors and stopped at the central plant door. The photographs show only the empty building waiting to be sold. If you are considering buying a commercial property in southern West Virginia, and the property is a former hospital that has been on the market for an unusually long time, at a price that has been reduced multiple times, please ask the broker about the maintenance staff. Ask them how many maintenance workers have been employed at the property since its closure. Ask them how long each worker stayed. And ask them whether any of the workers have provided written explanations for their resignations. The broker may not have this information readily available. The broker may have to look it up. The looking up will take time. The time will give you a chance to think about whether you actually want to buy the property. I am going to stop recording now. The recording has gone on longer than I intended. I have, in the recording, told the story as honestly as I can tell it with the information I have. I have, in the telling, recognized patterns in my own actions that I had not recognized clearly before, and I have committed to doing better in future situations that involve withholding information from people who depend on me. The commitment is, at this point, more aspirational than confirmed by behavior. If the next time I am in a situation that tests it, I will have the chance to find out whether the commitment will hold. The hospital is empty tonight. The building is, by my best information, dormant in the way it was dormant during most of the days following Patricia Dyer's resignation. The cameras are recording. The corridors are empty. The basement is empty. The morgue is locked. The cart is somewhere in the building, parked in a position no one has been able to identify, waiting for the next maintenance worker to arrive and to begin a shift, and to notice the elevator on the wrong floor, and to call the previous shift worker and to be told that the elevator does that sometimes. The next maintenance worker will be hired eventually when the broker decides that the daily security inspections are not sufficient. But the next worker will receive less information than I received because Carl is no longer there to tell them anything, and because no one else who knows the building is willing to share what they know. The next worker will start their first shift with no warnings at all. They will discover the patterns on their own, the way I discovered them on October 29th, the way Patricia Dyer discovered them on her third shift, the way David Hodgson discovered them in his first hour. I hope the building sells before another worker is hired. I hope the buyer is a commercial entity that gets demolished and converted to something other than a hospital. I hope, although I have no basis for the hope, that the demolition would, in some way, end the patterns. I do not know whether any of these hopes are realistic. I am going to stop hoping. I am going to focus on the new town and the new job and the new life that my wife had the courage to set up for us. I am going to leave the hospital behind to the extent that it will allow itself to be left behind. The recording is over.